2023 to be a year of significant declines in inflation, and it's actually our job to make sure that that's the case. But I would tell you that, with inflation headline,
Hello, good day. Welcome to
PCE
Financial
inflation is
Stockholm.
running
I'm
about
Christopher
5%.
Crystal,
This is
and
on a 12-month
today
basis.
is February 15th, 2023. Valentine's Day. There were a lot of good memes out, and the market was overall okay. Some of it was up, some of it was down. This is where you have to really talk to your advisor about whether you're doing a short term or a long term. Whatever your strategy is, you need to talk to your advisor. But in terms of what I saw and what I would look at, you did see somewhat of a decline yesterday. The inflation figures were, being digested, but they were relatively in line. And what you see out of them, and then that's reflected in today's retail sales figures, is that you did see some growth in January, and we already had that reflected in December. And I really just want to stress that this is not a market of fundamentals. This is a market of perception. So the Fed and the ECB will be able to continue raising rates at a relatively slow pace without choking off enough growth. And an interesting figure there is if you look at what came out on the CPI for the US, of course, if you look at car sales and you look at the white goods, so the washing machines, the ovens, and so forth. But if you look at something that's more basic, like the food cost, household food went up 10%, which is, I think, a lot. The restaurant went up 11%, which is really interesting because you had those January sales figures, and where were the main increases in jobs? Hotels and restaurant. So those are not high paying, so to speak, career jobs. There used to be a lot of careers in those. You could be a waiter at Tavern on the Green and put your child through college. Tavern on the Green is no longer around. But it used to be this fantastic restaurant. And so some of the restaurant industry could be a great way to get your kid through college. The United States with the IRS will actually be taxing tips. They were supposed to be taxing tips, but now they're making it even more difficult. So people will probably be shying away from that industry. But what we see is that there was a certain amount of growth, and you had, I think, the mooted move in the market yesterday was caused by you have a bit of a shift at the Fed. So there's a lady, Lael Brainard. She's the daughter of a diplomat. She grew up in Poland and other places as the daughter of a diplomat. And she's a bit of a Keynesian economist. Now, she entered into the government all the way back with Bill Clinton, and she's been working either in the Treasury or in the most recently the Fed. And probably what she'll be is Secretary of Treasury. She'll probably take over after Janet Yellen. Whether that happens before Biden's term ends now, or if he would run again, that she would be appointed for the second. It's up to Biden, but that looks like the career path now for this lady Brainard. But what I want to point out is, remember, there was some discussion yesterday about, who's going to keep Powell on the right track for the Fed rates, and I would just say, remember, Janet Yellen was appointed by Bill Clinton. Janet Yellen missed inflation not once, but twice, but multiple times. So she's not very good, even though she was brought in for the inflation. She used to be at the Minnesota Fed, and then she came in, and she's just not very good at inflation. She may know all the theories, and that's great. But in terms of application and what's really useful and avoiding financial crisis, well, she's been through some of the most. And so now Ben Powell, who missed the whole thing about inflation coming, and he had help from people like Larry Summers, who were saying, hey, inflation's coming, and yet he refused to raise rates, and then he was forced to raise rates at a really drastic pace, as opposed to a gradual, easy pace. You have a scenario where this individual leaving and going over to the National Economic Council, it doesn't really matter. None of them are very good at calling the inflation. And the best way to cure inflation is to have job growth and GDP growth. And if you can do that, you'll cure your inflation problems. but this is an administration that wants to have a slower GDP growth and a slower job growth rate. They're unsteady or nervous with a 3.4 unemployment. They want to have close to 6. So they'll let this continue. And many people are talking about the Inflation Reduction Act for 1.3 trillion, and what this does for green renewables, where effectively you're getting, it's like for every fifth dollar, $4 are spent by the company and $1 by the government. It's a great deal if you want to open a business, and that's why I continue to highlight that Freyr from Norway going down to Georgia with the Cock Industries, and they're going to be building the batteries. You have something like 10 to 15,000. I forget how many towns you have and villages in Georgia where they want to preserve the environment and they want to provide power, which they don't really have to these regions, and they need to build out some sort of power source, and they're going to try it with Freyr. And so no matter what you think about batteries or green energy and technology, if this works, this could be a fantastic solution, and it's set up on the East Coast. And don't forget, the political move is to get all these people to be Democrat, as opposed to Republican, because then they're getting the jobs from the Democrats. So there is a significant move being made with the Inflation Reduction Act and the job growth. And you've seen the economy hasn't completely collapsed. You do hear on sides that are against Biden saying how bad the economy is, and then you have the Biden side saying how great the economy is. The fact is, a lot of the policy is roughly the same from when Trump was in office. The differences are on the border control. The differences are on the Ukraine scenario. So now you're starting to see the impact of inflation and what happens when you create too much money in the system. They both are guilty of that, but now you have the impact of the inflation plus the war. But the war machine is running, so the orders are going. And remember, the war machine in the U.S. is only running at about 25%. So it's going to be a little shaky there for the economy. But when you look at the retail sales that came in today, you see relatively decent sales figures. And although some were weak, like with Gucci, you do see things like the discounters doing well, and some of the higher end are doing relatively well. You still have the high end sales market in the housing, they're still preserved. But remember, when we see that the major oil producers like the OPEC Plus cut production by 2 million barrels a day, and then Russia has recently cut 500,000. That's nearly, it's 2.5 million barrels per day cut in production. Russia did it as a result of sanctions and said, fine. And now, Russia's been saying that, look, we're only going to have gold and Chinese yuan in our wealth fund. We're not going to have dollars. We're not going to have euros. The question is, will China also move this way? Will other nations around the world move this way? India is still dealing with the United States and Europe. They did pick up planes from Russia for their air defense, but the commercial airliners, they look like they're picking up now from the US. So there's still a fair amount of business going between India. So when we see the BRICS, OPEC, the BRICS, and then the OPEC plus currency coming out, if it's within 12 months, which I think it will be interesting to see how India maps out on this, because they are part of the BRICS, right? So this is an interesting development, and we're looking at an economy that has really been negatively impacted by the Ukraine war, as opposed to being a special operation. I mean, we look at it as a war. Russia's calling it a special operation. You've seen a number of casualties on the Ukrainian side, depending on what figures you're using. Some put it at the Ukrainian side at, if you listen to Ukrainians, they're going to say it's only like 20,000. If you're going to listen to other media sources, they're going to say it's closer to 160 or maybe even 200. And then if you listen to the Russian casualties, some are going to say that the Russian casualties are well above 40,000 and closer to 250,000. And they lost 5,000 the other day. But it's in either case, We're looking at a war. Hopefully, we're moving closer to the peace table talks. And we saw that where I think when our prime minister was talking about the rebuild of Ukraine, and our prime minister is today in Ukraine. And so, despite the problems we have here with our society and criminality, and looking to have the military units help in the policing, which I think is a very dangerous move because you're one step closer to a police military state. It's a you had enough incentive for the Swedish prime minister to go over to the Ukraine. So he's meeting with Zelensky today. I don't think they're talking just about the munitions, although we make fantastic weapons. I think they're talking more about the rebuilding. So I would hope that we're closer to a peace table discussion as opposed to, so we can get the rebuild through. And so the people in Ukraine can stop dying, and we can help people in Turkey, and maybe we could even get sanctions lifted and help people in Syria who are suffering because the United States doesn't like their government, and rest of the world is against Syria and the sanctions. But remember, the people are generally innocent, so it would be nice to see them getting some help. But as far as the retail sales figures, we did see Airbnb coming out with a profit. This is the first time, and this is just after everybody's been saying they're a dying breed, that it's going to drop off the vine. And then but here within the Swedish market, we saw Niba coming in with good sales figures, better than expected, and paying out a dividend. So that's related to the housing market. So maybe like we heard from the Handelsbanken CEO about Swedish households getting over the cost of living, maybe we're seeing a slight rebound in the economy, and it's going to be enough to get us through. We still need to develop our energy. So I've attached in the notes a good article from the Wall Street Journal from Phil Graham, and I forget his name, Solon. He's a professor. They regularly write good articles in the Wall Street Journal talking about economics. I would recommend reading it. And it talks about the debt ceiling in the U.S. and how it should be approached as opposed to not. And I'm mentioning the U.S. A lot because the Swedish economy is generally following it right now. And on top of it, we did have the EU voting yesterday to say by 2035 that fossil fuel cars will not be sold. So, there was one party that was voting against it, and those were the Swedish Democrats. Fortunately, the Nazis are the only ones speaking sense on economics, but they are a crazy bunch. So we'll see how this develops for us in Sweden, and we'll keep an eye on that. So hopefully you're able to like the content, and you're subscribed, and we'll be talking to you shortly. But in the meantime, talk to your advisors and come up with your strategy for investments. Thank you very much for your time. Bye.